Hi everyone. I just thought I'd do a quick recording just to give my views on this story that's appeared in The Guardian regarding the British Justice Minister saying that the UK will seek reform of the ECHR. Now, I thought I'd just do a video rather than write something. Uh, Essentially because this really annoyed me. It's also really hot today, so this is basically going to be my form of ranting and my form of therapy. If some people find this interesting, that's great. If no one's watching, if no one's listening, then to quote a famous song I like, I feel better having screamed. So basically, to summarize this article, essentially the Justice Secretary is saying that the European Convention on Human Rights needs to be looked at again because we've got public confidence in the rule of law is fraying. Now, first off the bat, we have a government minister saying this. Now, she might act like she's just describing fact, but look, we know from media studies that the government doesn't just describe things. The government shapes and frames people's perspectives as well. They are the most powerful people who have this capacity to shape and frame our understanding. So when she says that public confidence in the rule of law is fraying, she is also contributing to that fraying by saying that. She is also amplifying that notion that there is something wrong with the convention that needs changing by mentioning that. Now, in particular, we know there's already a review going on in relation to Article 8, so that's the right to privacy and family life. I don't want to go into that. Really, this piece is all about Article 3 and about the freedom from inhuman and degrading treatment or punishment, and also the freedom from torture. Now, this is an absolute right. This means you can never torture somebody. You can never subject them to inhuman and degrading treatment. Why? Because essentially it's the most abhorrent, repugnant thing that you can do to a person. It's to use a person almost as a means to an end rather than an end to themselves. It's essentially a violation of the fundamental concept of dignity. You have human rights by virtue of the fact that you're human. It doesn't matter what you do. There are some rights that are so important it's never okay to violate, and the prohibition on torture and inhuman and degrading treatment or punishment is one of them. And now, so the UK here is suggesting that maybe we need to look again at this. And this is deeply worrying. This is deeply concerning, not least, it's been done in the context of an inability to deport people. So you can't deport someone if that person is at a real and substantial risk of torture in another country. And the reason that rule is there is because a good way in which a country could get around this without that rule would be basically to say, well, look, we're not going to torture you, but we're going to send you to a country that will. That's what extraordinary rendition was during the War of Terror. And so many states were complicit in that, European states included. So that rule is designed to stop that from happening. It's also designed by virtue of the fact that, it doesn't, you're prohibited from subjecting someone to these abhorrent, inhuman treatment. It's not okay for you to say, let's send you over to this country where you will be subjected to them as well. You have a positive duty to stop that from happening. Now, the UK tried to get around this way back, during the War on Terror. So during the War on Terror, UK did make the argument to say, well, look, yes, there's this prohibition on deportation. It's called the non-refoulement principle. So yes, there is this principle in place, but we think you need to take into account the person's conduct when assessing whether it's okay to send someone back or not. And this is essentially the exact same argument that the Justice Minister is making here. If the human rights law appear to protect the rule breaker over the rule follower. This is the exact same argument that was made back during 9/11. Now, thankfully, the European Court of Human Rights said, no, that's not okay. Because again, you have this right by virtue of the fact that you're human. It doesn't matter what you do, it's still never okay to subject to torture or inhuman and degrading treatment. It also doesn't matter where in the world that is going to happen. If it's not in the UK, if it's somewhere else, and we would be sending you to that somewhere else because you're human. It's dependent upon that fact that you're human. So thankfully, the European Court rejected that And it's deeply worrying and deeply concerning now that we've got another Labour government, because there's the Labour government back then as well, that has suddenly said, like, look, we need to be all populist on this and we need to push back. Now, we can mention, the case are, we're talking about people who've convicted for, or wanted for murder and rape, but they would be subject to overcrowded conditions in Brazil. And look, that they're obviously potentially very awful people here. But, what makes us above them is that we don't subject them to those kind of treatments. We don't do that. And so this is deeply worrying that the British government is essentially trying to water down or trying to dilute this absolute prohibition on torture and inhuman and degrading treatment. They tried it before, and now they're trying it again. And I think the reason why I want to say is that this is really essentially it's almost Orwellian in the way that the British government is deciding to do this now. So she mentions here that the European Convention on Human Rights is one of the greatest achievements of post-war politics. It is endured because it has evolved. Now it must do so again. Now, this is Orwellian. Because, yes, she's referring to what we call the convention as a living and breathing document, that its meaning evolved and changes over time. Now, the court developed this as a way to advance or progress human rights protection. So back when the convention was first drafted and enacted, it was absolutely fine to beat kids in school with a stick. We call it birching. That was absolutely fine. Fast forward a couple of decades, no, that constitutes inhuman and degrading treatment or punishment. That's a violation of Article 3. So that's the case with Tyre versus UK. So that developed within this prohibition on Article 3. So this living document is supposed to advance and progress human rights. Here it's being flipped on its head and saying, no, we need to use this narrative of a living and breathing document to actually roll back on rights protection. And for me, that is just positively Orwellian, and that's disturbing. And we just need to think about where that argument would go and what other states could use that. So here's another story that came out today, just in relation to the Hungarian police banning an LGBTQ pride parade. Now, this, there's quite clear your ECHR jurisprudence on this in relation to Russia, where Russia, when it was a member, did something similar. And the court found a violation, and Russia basically said, doesn't matter how many times you fine us, we're never going to allow this parade from happening. So, you can absolutely see how Hungary could use a similar argument about, no, the convention's gone too far, we now need to roll it back again. And so, the British government, and, the previous government did this all the time, is they think they're talking to a domestic audience and it's playing well, let's pander to the reform voters. But, international people hear these arguments too. During Brexit, for example, everyone was listening when a lot of British politicians thought they were just talking to themselves. So I'm sure Viktor Orban is hearing now what the British government is saying and thinking, absolutely happy days. This is great. Now, and this is coming at a time when we did have, we've had some recent pushback. Just a couple of weeks ago, a letter was written to the European Court of Human Rights and the Council of Europe from 9 states saying we need to look at the convention. It's gone too far. UK didn't sign that, but they're saying the exact same things. And this comes in the wake of, in the early 2010s, we did have reform of the court and change of the court's admissibility criteria, an emphasis on what we call the margin of appreciation and subsidiarity, put into the convention. So that has been done. But nevertheless, that's not been done enough. It's happening or at least this is what these states are saying. It's happening at a very, very worrying time. Here again, she's doing that Orwellian thing and twisting the living and breathing document rather to progress and advance human rights to roll it back. And I think it's deeply worrying that it's a Labour government that's doing this, that's trying to court reform UK voters. They might think that's a good strategy. I think, why go for populism? I'm sure a voter who's inclined to vote for reform, why vote for populism light when you can get full fat populism instead? So I think this is a very deeply worrying I think it's a politically stupid strategy, both domestically and internationally. I think it's deeply worrying. Uh, and just in general for human rights, it's very, very problematic, and coming from a Labour government as well. But I say that with a pinch of salt, seeing as what the previous Labour government did in relation to the war on terror. It was not. It brought in the Human Rights Act, but it was not afraid as well of making attacks on rights as well, at the same time. So yeah, deeply, deeply worrying times. I think, like I said, this was just a short rant rather than writing a piece. My office is really, really warm, but I'm glad I had a bit of a rant, and hopefully some of you might have found what I said a bit interesting. But yeah, worrying times ahead, and maybe something to keep an eye on. Thank you.